We are going to look at whether the same timing path can have both setup and a hold violation. When I say both setup and a hold violation for the same timing path, looking at the timing diagram or the clock diagram, I'm saying that my data is coming late, which means it is coming after the setup time. And on the other hand, I'm also saying my data is coming early, which means it is coming before the hold time. So this is a paradox because on one hand, I'm saying it is coming late. On the other hand, I'm saying it is coming early. So can this happen? Does this scenario actually take place? If so, what could be the reasons behind it? What could be the factors influencing it? Let us look into it. There will be multiple factors, but let us first look at something called as PVT. PVT in VLSI stands for process, voltage, and temperature. These are the external factors that could be influencing my chip and the performance of my chip. And these can cause something called as global variations. Now coming to variations and we consider process. If I take a wafer, there will be many dies on the wafer. The die which is sitting in the center of the wafer will have completely different delays and will behave differently compared to the die sitting in the corner. It is because of the imperfections in the manufacturing tool and how the foundry tools behave. So to model these variations in the design, we will take into consideration what effect these variations will cause on my NMOS and PMOS. So this can make my PMOS and NMOS slow, or this can make my PMOS and NMOS work normal, or I've written down it as typical, or it can make my PMOS and NMOS faster. It can also make my PMOS slower and NMOS faster, and my PMOS faster and NMOS slower. For simplicity's sake, we will not take this condition. We will just take slow, slow, typical, and fast. This is how process variations are modeled in my design. Coming to voltage, any chip has to be powered by an external voltage source. As we all know, nothing is perfect. There are imperfections. And due to these imperfections, there could be fluctuations in the voltage source. So if I give a voltage of 1 volt as input, due to the fluctuations, taking a percentage of 9%, I might get 0.91 volts on the lower side and 1.09 volts on the higher side. Similarly, temperature, I should be operating my chip anywhere, right? I could be operating it in a cold weather or a hot weather. So let us take a range of conditions. I would say minus 40 degrees Celsius and then 0 degrees Celsius and then 125 degrees Celsius. So no matter where I'm using my chip, even if there are external factors, my chip should be able to deliver the performance that it promised. So we have to model all these variations into our designs. To model these variations and these different operating conditions in the design, there will be different types of libraries which will be characterized. Now, if we consider a very simple NAND gate, the characterization of this NAND gate will be done across all these PVT conditions, and for each of these conditions, we will have a library. The same NAND gate can have different delays across different PVT conditions or different libraries. For example, if we take the SS library, my NAND gate could have, or let us take the typical first. If it is having 100 picoseconds of delay, My slow library, the same NAND gate can have 120 picoseconds of delay, and the fast NAND gate, it can have 80 picoseconds of delay. So the library characterization is done through simulations, and therefore we get for a typical NAND gate, how would an estimate delay be if the operating conditions change. That is how these characterizations are done. Now, since we have so many libraries, while doing our timing analysis, we have to take into consideration all these operating conditions and all these libraries. Now we come to something called as MMMC, MMMC, which stands for multi-mode, multi-corner, where we do the worst case and best case analysis for setup and hold. So in multi-mode, multi-corner, we are essentially taking all these PVT conditions and all the libraries into account. Now, what do I mean by worst case and best case? Let us look at this timing path that we previously took. For simplicity, I'm just taking 2 flops, 3 gates, and 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 OR, and a simple clock. If I write down the setup equation, this would be the setup equation, and this would be the hold equation. What could be the worst case for setup? Which means in what condition there is highest possibility of my setup failure. If we look at the setup equation, the highest possibility of failure occurs when my T combinational is having higher delay, and then T launch is having higher delay, and then T capture is having a lower delay. So if my T combinational is high and T launch is high and then T capture is faster, that would be the worst case for my setup. Exactly opposite goes with hold. For hold, the worst case analysis should be my T capture should be high, my T launch should be fast or the delay should be low, and my T combinational should be less. So this would be the worst case for setup and worst case for hold. So if the worst case for setup is the delays for my T combinational should be high, and the delays for T launch should be high, and delays for T capture should be low. And for hold, it is the exact reverse. This should be very fast, combinational. This should be very fast, and this should be slow. Right, I forgot about this buffer. This would be the worst case scenario for my setup as well as hold. Right? So when the tool does timing analysis, it will consider the worst case for setup as well as the worst case for hold. Remember, we thought about different libraries having different delays for NAND gate or any other gate. So in the worst case scenario, my worst delay will be considered, which is 120 PS. In the best case scenario, my best delay would be considered, which is 80 PS. So while calculating setup time or doing the setup analysis for a timing path, what the tool does is it will take for the combinational delays, it will take the worst delay which is 120 PS. For simplicity's sake, I'm taking the same delay for all the combinational cells, but it would be different. And best delays for my capture, 80 PS here, and worst delays for my launch. So this is how my setup analysis is done. Similarly for hold, exactly opposite thing happens, where combinational delays are taken as the best delays, and capture latency, it will consider the highest delays, and launch latency, it will again consider the best delays. So this is how setup calculation as well as hold calculation happens. If we look at how T-combi and T-capture latency and launch latency varies across setup and hold analysis, we can easily see the difference. Now in setup analysis, my worst delays for T-combi is considered, which will add up to 120 plus 120 plus 120, which equals 360. Whereas the same combinational path, the delay while calculating hold will be 80, 80, 80, which is 240. So here itself we can see 120 PS of difference. Now coming to capture latency. Capture latency will be considered best case for setup analysis, wherein I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buffers. So 6 are 48. So that's 480. Whereas for hold, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each one will take 120 PS, which is 720. And then for launch, for setup, worst delays are considered, wherein I have 4 buffers. So 120 into 4 is 480. Whereas in hold, best delays are considered, wherein I have 4 320. Now you understand how the combinational delay as well as the skew varies across setup and hold analysis in MMMC. Now can you correlate why such a condition might occur wherein my setup and hold can violate for the same path? This is not it. There are other factors also. Now let's go into something called as OCV. OCV stands for on-chip variation. While PVT is external factors, OCV is on the same chip. Remember the wafer that we took? We are comparing die to die. Now it is within the same die. In on-chip variations, the same NAND gate, when used in a different location and in a different timing path, can have different delay altogether. So this is the NAND gate. This is the same NAND gate, same drive strength, etc. But because of its location and because of the timing path that it is in, it can have completely different delays. Apart from that, the activity around this NAND gate, if I have a concentration of cells, there can be higher IR drop here compared to here. That can lead to different voltages being propagated to the NAND gate. And therefore, my two NAND gates placed differently can have different delays. This is called as on-chip variation. This is not a comparison between dies or between chips. On the same chip, if I take a same cell, it can have variations. This is called as on-chip variations. Now, how do we model this in our designs? So we come up with something called as D-rates. What are D-rates? D-rates are nothing but I take the NAND gate. This is the nominal delay 100 ps. Since I am not unsure about the variations on the chip, while doing the worst case analysis, I will increase the delay by, let's say, 5%. So that becomes, I will call it plus 5%. That becomes 105 ps. Best case would be minus 5%. That would be 95 ps. Let us consider the same timing path. Considering the same timing path, which is already having a worst case, let me color code this for simplicity. On top of the best case, worst case, now I'm applying derates, and in derates also, I'm using best case, worst case. So my delay of 100 ps, or I'm already applying derates in terms of percentages. So the worst case for setup analysis is I increase my worst case delays by 5%. So 120 becomes plus 5%. Across. 80 becomes minus 5%. So it becomes much more faster, right? So this setup versus hold variation keeps on increasing. Delay becomes higher, delay becomes lower after OC. So this is how on-chip variation affects our timing paths. So this I have done for setup. We can do a similar thing for hold. In hold, the combi will have lesser delays, and again a minus 5% reduction on the already best case delays. Now there are different kinds of OCV like AOCV, POCV and all that will be discussed in detail on the OCV video. Now just like PVT we have applied on cells, the next effect would be the next factor where my setup and hold can violate is I have best case and worst case for my nets also. So these are RC factors. The same way external factors affect my cells, it can affect my nets also. So even in routing or even in nets, I can have RC best, RC worst, C best, C worst, CC worst, etc. etc. I can have different RC corners. In each of these corners again, I will have different delays for the nets. The delays will vary. Now considering a typical net delay of 10 ps, my best case net delay can be 8 ps. Typical will be 10 ps and worst case could be 12 ps. On top of the cell delays, my net delays have also a variation. So considering the worst case scenario for my setup, all my combi and launch will have 12 ps of net delays. All my capture path will have 8 ps of net delays. So here also we see a lot of variation between setup and hold. So this could be one of the factors. Apart from PVT, OCV, and RC factors, we also have something called as crosstalk. See, what is crosstalk? Crosstalk is nothing but interference of one net on the other, and one can become an aggressor and one can become a victim. If aggressor and victim are transitioning in the same direction, the aggressor will actually help the victim become faster. If my aggressor and victim are transitioning in the opposite direction, the effect will be negative and the aggressor will make the victim much slower. So depending on this, I have to understand how my adjacent nets are switching and what effect those nets have on my nets in the timing path. So even for this, we will have to consider the best case and worst case scenarios. So the best case would be both will be switching in the same direction and my victim will be faster. Worst case will be my aggressor and victim are switching in the opposite direction, hence making the victim much slower. So for crosstalk, my best case will be my victim becomes faster and my worst case will be my victim becomes slower. So all the nets in my for setup analysis, all the nets in my combi path, I will take it as they have become slower because of crosstalk. And then all the nets in my capture path, they have become faster. So this is one variation between setup and hold that can cause setup and hold variations and timing to violate in both setup and hold. So let us summarize all the effects together in one timing path diagram. So we have considered factors like PVT and RC factors, and then OCV derates, and then we have also seen crosstalk effects. Summarizing all of this, let us take simply only a setup calculation. So now I will have for the cells, I will have worst case delays, which is 120 picoseconds because of PVT corners. And then best case delays for the launch. On top of these worst case delays, I will have net delays, worst case, so that will be 12 PS for the nets. And then 8 PS for the nets. And then I apply derates wherein I amplify my cell and net delays by 5%. For the worst case, I'll keep dots. And then here I will reduce my delays by 5%, both for nets and cells. On top of this, I have crosstalk effects as well, wherein I will take my nets switching in the opposite direction for doing setup analysis for my launch path and my combi. So this is my crosstalk delta, which is having a worst case effect on my nets, whereas for the launch, I will have the best case effect where my transition is much better. So a combination of all of these can definitely push us to a situation where we are having very less margin in setup as well as very less margin in hold, and in very rare cases there can be paths which violate both setup and hold, right?